Good evening, everyone. I'll call this meeting to order. This is the Ways and Means Budget Deliberations meeting of May 7th, 2020. I'm your chair, Otis Wheeler. This meeting is being recorded by the Ways and Means Committee and by GCTV. If anyone else present is doing the same, please let me know.
It is also being recorded on WebEx.
Thank you, Clerk Scott. Would you please take the roll?
Councilor Wheeler.
Here.
Councilor Forgy.
Here.
Councilor Bottomley.
Here.
Councilor Disorder.
Here. Here.
Councilor Disorder, thank you very much. Councilor Elmer.
Here.
Chairman Wheeler, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. So we will be deliberating on the FY21 city budget, capital and operating. We're unlikely to take any votes tonight. That will happen on Monday, most likely. I thought I would start by just giving a quick recap of where I think we're at, if I can find my notes. Just a broad overview. There's a proposed tax rate of $23.55. That's a 62-cent increase. That's an increase of 2.69%. As always, the majority of the increase comes from retirement and health insurance, schools as well, but not so much this year. There's $292,164 worth of new growth, which is modest, but in the range of what we've been experiencing as long as I've been on the council. We have a fairly healthy stabilization, but we're going to need it. The school committee, just to remind everyone, requested $21,436,117. That's an increase of $2,135,037 from FY20. The mayor's proposed funding for Greenfield Public Schools is $19,671,080. So it's considerably less than the school committee's amount that they asked for, but it's an increase of $370,000 from last year. That's my recap. I think we'll just get right into deliberations, since Ways and Means has done a lot of, we've had a lot of questions to ask, but not much time to deliberate. So now's our chance. And unless there's any objection from members, I'm going to suggest that we try to be orderly and go through line by line, starting in the budget book on page 60 with our budget, the city council budget. I'll give everyone a moment. Councilor Forgy.
Before we start, I wonder if it might be worth us thinking about what the actual goal is for next fiscal year. And that's why I'm very happy that the mayor is on board with us tonight. I'd like to start maybe from getting a sense from her if she thinks that this budget is going to stand, excuse me, or we're going to have to revisit this budget going forward. And also, what are we looking at revenue? I know for this year we're going to be fine, but for next year, the first quarter, though having those things sort of cleared up and having a guide to perhaps help us in our deliberations would be greatly welcome.
Thank you. Good questions. I think that would be a great way to frame our conversation. Mayor Wiedegartner, did you hear
Is that-
Councilor Forgy's questions?
I did. She cut out a little bit, but hi, Penny. She cut out a little bit, but I think I got the gist of it. What I can say, and I believe Liz Gilman is on here, and I might ask her to address the revenue piece. What I can say is that we knew going into this, we didn't know going into this budget, we would be in the midst of COVID-19, coming out of it. Not coming out of COVID-19, but, coming to this point in the budget deliberations. So, but nevertheless, we knew that it was going to be tight going forward. We knew that we did not want to raise that we always had, taxes are something that rarely go down. We wanted to keep a reasonable increase in our tax rate that also allowed us to function properly as a city, and perhaps to enhance some of those areas that we felt we would need in order to accomplish the growth and progress that I envision for Greenfield. So to some extent, it's a tale of one budget, but two realities. So it's clear that we are now in the midst of something that we did not expect to be in the midst of, and we are rather uncertain about what the final outcome will be in terms of how it will affect us both economically and affect this budget. The budget that you have in front of you is a good budget for the city of Greenfield. It does help us achieve some of our goals. And it is, in my opinion, fairly bare bones. Liz is very good at, and we had many conversations in December, I'm sorry, not December, in January and February, about what our end goal was and about how we could achieve it. And she always was very good, both on the capital side and the general budget side, to give me a number that I could hit, and what the ramifications of that number would be. Giving everybody everything they wanted would have given us a nearly, it would have been well over $3. I don't have that number in front of me, unfortunately. You may remember it, but it would have been a very over almost a $3 increase. And so we opted for somewhere in the middle. And I feel like that somewhere in the middle is a budget that, all things being the same as they were when we gave it to you, would sustain us quite well. But we're at the point where we are, and yes, I suspect we might have to revisit it later in the year. Well, when I say that later in the year, sometime in the late summer, early fall, when we kind of have a sense of where the governor's budget's going to land and where revenues for the state are going to land, and frankly, where revenues for the city are going to land. So now that I've said the revenue word, Liz, I wonder if you might be able to, I don't know if you heard Councilor Forgy's question, but as I recall, it was, does she want, how are the revenues now and for the future? Is that right, Councilor Forgy?
Well, I think that Councilor Forgy had also asked, do we anticipate another meeting? Which we do.
Okay, thank you.
That's for sure. But it's so hard when you don't know the magnitude of what you're dealing with. The best we can do is make a list of where we would cut and prioritize it and go all the way to the worst case scenario, which I think is like a 20 to 24% cut in state aid. I hope that doesn't happen, but we need to be prepared to deal with the scenarios that will come. I do think we'll be fine for this year. Next year, probably some juggling on some of the local receipts. I forwarded the mayor, I'll send it to all of you, an interesting article by the Pioneer Institute that says that even during recessions, the property tax revenue is pretty consistent. So we'll have a better handle on that come June 29th. But I really feel, as did Mayor Wiedegardner, that if someone couldn't pay their taxes, they weren't going to pay them. So really delaying it to June 29th were for those individuals who were really struggling and trying to make it to that point. And we still could get the escrow payments in from the banks. It's not going to be easy. You know, it was hard just doing the budget under the governor's budget. So I really feel the next one will be reductions, really hinges on what the state is going to do.
Thank you, Director Gilman and Mayor Wiedegardner. Councilor Forgy, do you have a follow-up?
I do. So as we go forward, the budget, I'm looking at the budget now and I'm thinking in normal times, it's a very workable budget. It's not normal times. Is there would be the right word? Is there an opportunity for us as the Ways and Means Committee, as we're moving forward in our budget deliberations, to make recommendations where we see cuts can be made if revenue falls off? Or is that a conversation that needs to happen on June 30th?
I'll let Director Gilman address this if she'd
I
like
think
to.
it's a conversation, Mayor or Councilor Forgy. I think that, you know, when we were having a difficult time with the budget and we went back to departments and we said, we need you to cut, but we had them cut where it would be least affect them in the least. So they made the choices. We gave them a dollar amount to cut and we let the departments do it. And I'm kind of feeling like that because the mayor has to deal with the ramifications of reductions in services and everything else. So I really feel, you know, that she and I and probably Danny will work on a list and we'll prioritize it. Whether you want to make those, I think what you're asking is, do we want to make these reductions right now or do we want to wait? And this all has an impact. It's a lean budget to begin with. I really think that, you know, we know what we have to do. We just need to know the state's numbers. So we will do it. Because as you know, it has to all balance.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director
So
Gilman.
I would like to
Yeah, go ahead,
I
Mayor.
would also like to address that. Okay, thank you. Basically, I was just going to say that I second what Liz has said, and I was going to say it if she hadn't said it. So, yes, I think if you make recommendations, they may not be the same recommendations that we would make, but we would certainly look at them and accept them. But I do feel, particularly this year, and particularly with this budget, because as I said, it's already been through one round of cuts. And we would do our best to meet a certain number that you may feel is the correct number going forward. I just want to encourage you to give that some thought. Whether it's in the recommendations or whether it's a flat out, we think you need an X number of percentage reduction, whatever it is would be something that we would certainly be willing to work with, and I feel like we know how we could meet it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. We have a couple of questions from councilors, so I'm going to go to those at this time. Councilor Elmer.
Yes, thank you, Councilor Wheeler. Maybe Liz can answer this. My understanding is that the money that the city is spending on COVID gets reimbursed 75% by the federal government. Is there, and I heard talk that the states are asking for money from the federal government to help pay for what the municipalities are spending. Do you have a sense of whether there is going to be federal money coming to the state that would be then filtered down to the cities?
Little guidance, but yes, FEMA, first of all, let's start with FEMA. They do reimburse 75%. But it's in certain categories. It's not just for anything you think is COVID related. They have particular items and services that they will reimburse for. We have set up a special revenue account, which the Department of Revenue recommended. It will be coded to there. The reimbursement comes in and offsets the deficit. You are left with your 25% to pay. And this year being tough, if we can pay it and get reimbursed later, we will, but it may have to sit in this special revenue fund. Secondly, they have given out already money to the states. And from what I understand, 45% of that money is supposed to go directly to cities and towns. However, in particular by population, but there's no guidance. It could be for specific types of projects. I don't know if anyone remembers the ERA stimulus funds back in 2008, I want to say, where you would choose a project you were going to do from the bucket of projects they presented and would get funds to do that. It certainly would help the economy. And then I'm hearing too that there's another round they're working on to go directly to the cities and towns, to local government. The only thing I can say is most of it is not to offset your operating budgets. It will be projects. And it's one-time money, as much as it can help and maybe mitigate some use of, say, stabilization. You still have to deal with the reality of how quickly the economy will bounce back. And so I think this is going to be a several-year thing. but for those of you who lived through the cuts that in 2009 and also 2002 and 3 in state aid, it takes a long time for it to get back to where it was. You know, it doesn't automatically happen the next year, you know? So I think we have to be prepared. And again, this goes to our list of how we want to go forward. And how much and that's something I would certainly be interested in council's opinion of. If we were to use stabilization, are you comfortable with what amount, you know? Because it is an option if we're falling short for revenues. But again, knowing that it may not, you have to be careful. It's a fine line because you want to be, and we would have to dedicate any free cash to putting it back, you know, or as much as we could put it back. So it's certainly not going to be easy. There will be some federal money. My guess is it won't be like, here, use this to supplement your revenue that you lost. I think it will be more like there are certain projects that we will approve for you to do. There might be some things like, I've heard talk of unemployment funds. So for those of us who pay our own unemployment, there may be some funds for that. Because we are self-insured on unemployment, in case anyone didn't know that. So that would be a plus, for sure. Do you have any other questions?
Councilor Elmer, do you have a follow-up before I move on?
I'd like to add a couple of things to that if I could.
Yes, go ahead, Mayor.
Hello? Oh, okay, thank you. So I just wanted to remind Phil and everyone, yes, we would get reimbursed. It would not be next year. It would probably not be the year after that. It can take as much as 3 to 4 years before we see that money come back to us. It does come back to us, but it's not going to just be there to supplement, you know, the rest of this year or 21 or 22 necessarily. There is an ability to get money faster, get a reimbursement faster, expedited, they call it, but that's at 50%, not 75%, but you do get the money faster, which may be a good option for us to follow this year on this particular issue. I mean, and then eventually you get reimbursed an additional 20 it to 75%, but that 25% is what lags behind. So that option is available to us. We haven't spent as much money on COVID fighting this thing as we thought we would. We're pleased about that, but nevertheless, it's a significant bottom line, and we don't really know when it's going to end in such a way that we can say, okay, unlike a hurricane or a big massive flood, the water goes away and you eventually assess the damage and you can say, okay, that's done. We're not going to have to deal with anything going forward. So this is a little different. So we do have a couple.
Thank you, Mayor.
Looking at it. And I feel like the people that have been spending the money have been spending it wisely. So there's a good chance we would get reimbursed for a good amount of it. Okay.
Good, thank you, Mayor. There's a lot to dig into here. Councilor DeSorger, I know, had a question about 10 minutes ago. Do you still have one, Councilor?
Yes, that was very helpful. Thank you both. So I'm just actually looking to both of you for further guidance as we make this. And so I was just writing down a couple of things while you were talking. As we're looking at this budget, and I don't, um, do we need to know, as we're looking at this, where we are with spending, extra spending as related to COVID-19? Perhaps we don't, because that's something that will be coming in later. That's one. And my second question is, do you want us to be listing any priorities, or you'll be doing that? That was a second part. And my third question is, one of the DLS notifications that we received of many, which I know that Liz, or Director Gilman, excuse me, that you're reading those night and day, much more so than me, and probably understanding them much more so than me. But one of the notifications we talked about, one of them was about deferring borrowing under certain circumstances. So I just want to know, I agreed with the mayor and everything that you've said. It was a very good budget. And I just wanted to get from you, if you wanted any further, those three questions. I'll leave it at that.
I would love to get your thoughts on reductions and priorities, and see how they
Okay.
match with that. I think that would be a terrific thing.
Okay.
Many minds, come up with some good thoughts. Then in terms of, I think are you speaking of deferring borrowing in terms of capital?
It was, I can't on this, I can't pull this notification up on this while I'm on this WebEx, unfortunately. But it was one of the DLS notifications that we had this week, I believe, and it was about deferring. Not that I'm thinking of that, but it did come out. I just read everything that comes out, and I thought that's our job, is to be planning for the future.
Right.
And I don't think that we're there yet, but well, I don't really, but you know where we are. But it was in one of the notifications.
Yeah, one came
And
today, so I don't think it's that.
yeah.
Let's see. Seeing if I can bring it up.
If I had two computers, I'd be
In
doing
April, not seeing it in the last two.
All right. I think we'll move on, and
that. Okay, that's fine.
Woman, if you find it, feel free to jump in. So,
All right.
do we have any more broad questions or discussion on the sort of budget in the context of COVID-19?
Well, yes, my third part, which was the first part,
Yep.
which was number one. I'm just talking about the tax rate here, which was my first question. Do we need to know, and I'm not asking this for my own benefit, but do we need to know what we have spent thus far, to what extra we've spent this far? For instance, if we were in any way in the negative from the expenditures, which I'm sure this has been very costly, does that impact at all what we should be looking at for this year's budget? Do we need to know that figure before proceeding, or an approximate?
No.
Okay, all right.
No, and simply, no, I just want to explain it a little.
Okay.
We are being allowed to run a deficit in this one account that's we're going to get reimbursement on. and we're allowed to amortize it over 3 years in terms of whether it would impact our tax rate. And we are allowed to short-term borrow, so it doesn't affect the tax rate. So
Okay.
at this point, it's not at the magnitude of a lot of debt, like temporary borrowing, to where that would be a big impact on the budget. It's not that much money at this point.
Very
So-
good. I feel much more comfortable than proceeding. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right,
But-
thank you. Thank you, Director Gilman. Any further discussion on this broader point? Okay. Seeing none, is there any other broad discussion that we'd like to have before we get into a line by line? Councilor Elmer.
I'm wondering if I could skip ahead on the line by line. I had a question about the nearly $1 million for dredging the Leiden Glen, which jumped out at me. I don't remember seeing this when we heard from the water people. What am I missing?
I don't want to jump around because we have a lot to go through, and I'm going to get lost quickly if we do.
Okay, I'll withdraw it.
Thank you. But we will absolutely get to that, and hopefully while Director Warner is still on the line.
Thank you.
So because we have so much to get through, I am going to suggest that we now go through line by line, but feel free, we can zoom out to a broader discussion when it seems appropriate. But because we are going to be voting on all of this on Monday, there's a lot for us to get through, and I want to make sure everyone's had a chance to ask their questions, or rather just kind of discuss it amongst ourselves. So again, I'll suggest that we go to page 60 on the budget book. The City Council, I think we had a good discussion about that with the mayor. Generally, what I'm looking for here is if councilors are inclined to vote for a cut to a line item, I generally think that it's best discussed in these meetings. So anything that you're questioning, now's a good time for us to talk about it. Councilor Forgy?
Thank you. I think that we should look at 2 line items within this budget. First is the stipend line item for town councilors, and second is the meetings and seminars line item as well. Both of those, if they were cut from the budget, would add up to over $30,000 worth of savings. I have spoken on council floor about a proposed pay increase to the stipends. I don't believe that we as councilors should be receiving them to begin with, and I think that that's a possibility that we can cut if it means we have to save a job somewhere, either on the town or school side. And I'm also thinking in a broader term that when it comes to meetings and seminars, we don't know how long isolation and sheltering is going to happen. And that to me is also another place where I think we could also give back some money and set a good example for our town, the people that we represent. If we have to do this, I think these are 2 line items that we can possibly look at for cuts to come out of that.
Thank you, Councilor Forgy. Just to update anyone who wasn't there for committee chairs on Tuesday, the item about increasing council stipends was I believe, pushed back to tabled
October.
to October. So that won't be looked at, the increase won't be looked at for a number of months. The line item itself is enumerated by ordinance, so we don't actually have the ability to, well, I guess in the past we have cut things in sort of violation of the charter and ordinances. I don't recommend it. The meetings and seminars one I support because, and that one, part of the reason is that one gives back to, it doesn't all get used, and it can go towards either an interdepartmental transfer towards the end of the year, so even though the number looks high, I think what generally expended on it is not as high. Any other counselors want to chime in on this one? All right, seeing none. My inclination here is that while we should wait to take actual votes on the departmental salaries and expenses, I would hear motions to amend at this meeting. And so if anyone feels strongly enough about any cuts or amendments, you're free to make them this evening. And were they to pass, the amendments would then be discussed on Monday. Councilor Forgy.
Just a question, like on the procedure. So if nobody makes any amendments to this right now, we can still make an amendment on Monday when we finalize what we're presenting out to full council. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Councilor DeSorter.
Just FYI, my chat box wasn't working, so I'm going to
Okay,
be
well.
raising my hand. So did we have money? I believe that I recall that we had money that we didn't use this year in meetings and seminars, right? I think I remember that. I think it was about half of it that we didn't use. So I would just want to comment on that if we needed to do that and do that at our expense, I would be happy to do that out of what the stipend was, but just to set an example. I thought that was, I hadn't thought of that, but I concurred.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Elmer.
The stipends, is there a dollar amount in the charter, or is it just say that there must be money paid?
Yes, there's a dollar amount.
Okay. I guess I want to say it seems premature to try to cut that now, but I can see Councilor Forgy's point. If it gets to the point where jobs are at stake, it might be a good gesture on the council's part to volunteer that. And that's what I have to say about that.
Thank you. Seeing none, we'll move to the mayor's budget on page 61, mayor's office. Probably Liz, and then I'll go to Councilor Forgy. I see your hand. So Director Gilman, there's fairly strict language in the code about how the mayor may receive a salary increase. And it
Yeah.
says that it shall be the lesser of the average increase with all bargaining units, or 5% of the mayor's salary. Can you confirm whether the average increase with all bargaining units is the less than the 5%?
For the past year, because
Um,
I would say it's less than 5%. Yes.
Okay, so in that case, the proposed increase to the mayor's salary needs to be adjusted to the average increase. So that would, so I guess I would ask for that number. If we can have that number by Monday, that would be great.
Okay. Can I ask?
Yes, go ahead.
So you just passed a dollar amount for the mayor's salary.
Right. So that
Okay.
and I, under my understanding, I guess when I voted on the increase to 85,000, my assumption was that would be the mayor's salary in FY21. But the requested number, as I see it, is 89,000. I took to mean, I guess I assumed was a 5% increase over the 85.
Well, you have to think of the time frame that we had to submit the budget to.
Right.
This was before you voted. And so, I know, I'll get the number for you.
Yeah, I'm really just looking for clarity on that and making sure that we're within our bounds in the code, in the charter. Thank you. Councilor Forgy, did you have a question?
Well, I had some observations. I'm sorry, this is the way it's going to be through the whole season. Sorry.
That's okay. That's great.
When I started looking at the information that was given us by Liz Gilman regarding salaries and wages in the town of Greenfield, it's been a while since I've been out of it for a while, but I was really astounded to see, in comparison to some of the senior department heads, what the mayor is actually going to make at 85,000. And I'm kind of thinking that, you can't take pay away from people. I get that part and everything else, but I'm also thinking that if we get that number from Liz next week on Monday, maybe we can look at a recommendation on that mayor's salary again. Also, if she could, while we're here, the permanent salary and wages line item, break it out by each employee in the office. And please, can you tell me what they started at and what they will be making and what kind of an increase that will be for fiscal year 21? I would appreciate that.
This is the mayor's office.
Correct. This would be the employees in the mayor's office. Thank you.
Councilor Forgy, were you asking for Director Gilman to answer that question now, or
no, Monday is fine.
Or to
okay, good. I was thinking.
No,
I know we have a lot of that, but I'm sure the director can get it for us specifically.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, any further discussion on the mayor's office budget? All right. Seeing none, we'll turn the page to executive administration.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I'm sorry,
Counselor. I always see your hand. Counselor DeSorbo.
I'm sorry, Counselor Wheeler. I had my hand up. So I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to know on that second line item, permanent salary and wages, full-time. If there was anything in that was contractual, that would, so that we have the total picture on that by Monday, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. All right, so again, turning the page to Executive Administration. I had a question which may just be forgetting. And this may be for the mayor, I'm not sure. The chief of staff position was obviously a change in job title, and there's a proposed increase in salary. Was the job description changed as well? And Mayor, if you'd like to answer that, that'd be great. Oh, you're on mute. Can't hear you.
I said, bear with me. I stepped away from the meeting to check on something, and I couldn't get my way back. So here I am. And your question is, did her job description was changed when she took office was hired in December, or she came on a couple of weeks ahead of me, a week or so, a little over a week, in order to transition with Mark Smith. Because it was a chief of staff position, not just whatever his nose, I forget what it was called. It had a title. We changed the job. We changed the job description to be more in line. It doesn't mean we wholesale changed it, because some of the same duties that Mark had are the same duties that she has now. But we put it more in line with what a chief of staff to a mayor's office is. And so I certainly have that. We certainly have that job description if you think that would help you. She came in at a very low salary because we actually had no money to hire someone. If you'll recall, Mark Smith, the mayor did not fund Mark Smith's position going forward, nor did he fund mine for that matter, going forward. So we had to, create a salary based on what was seemed reasonable and affordable for the remainder of this fiscal year. And so it was clear that the position deserved, it's way below what Mark was making when he left. And it seemed the position deserved the raise that it received.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree. And yeah, that's the answer that I was hoping for. I just wanted to confirm that, Mark Smith's title was Director of General Administration,
That's right.
I believe. And I think the Chief of Staff title is more appropriate. And I'm glad that it sounds like we professionalized it.
Yes.
Councilor Forgy, did you have a question?
Yes, actually, Mayor, could you just tell us the amount that Chief of Staff was hired on with?
I wish I could. Without looking it up and getting back to you, or putting it on the Monday memo.
Perfect. Monday memo sounds great. Thank you.
I will get to it briefly because it's not as simple as a number. So
Yeah.
the line item for this, if you look back to compare FY19 to FY20 to FY21, it was higher in FY19. There was a rather aggressive suggestion that the past mayor was going to go over budget on this line item, and therefore, according to the charter, would have to pay the amount out of his own pocket. And at that point, there was a lot of rather creative rejiggering, which essentially did not funded jobs through January 1st, but not through the end of the fiscal year was my understanding of what was going on.
Thank you.
It was a difficult time. We are moving on. Any other questions on executive administration before we continue? Okay, seeing none, we'll turn the page to 64, economic development. And, we have, had robust discussions on a lot of these already, but counselors to discuss any. Director Adams is in the room with us. The economic development department, as I think I've mentioned, the city gets a lot out of it. Some of the positions are partially grant funded. Also, all of the community development block grants come through this department. So we certainly get a lot out of it, and I for one, would not be proposing any decreases here. Any discussion? Okay. Seeing none, we'll turn the page to 66, assessing. Any questions or discussion on assessing? Councilor Forgy.
Okay, elected official salary and wages. How many elected assessors do we have right now? We have 3?
I think so, yes.
We do? Okay. Okay.
Oh my God.
Can I ask a follow-up to that?
Please do.
Thank you. So property assessments, does that mean we're in a reval year?
We are coming into one, yes. But no,
Okay.
it actually is an ongoing, it's part of that contract, but it's an ongoing contract with RRG, provides assessment and other services throughout the year. To where we had a department of, if you go back in time, there probably were 4 or 5, I've looked back at this, to where now we're down to 1 and a part-time and an assessing contract.
Yeah.
And this is a reval year.
Okay. Is there an expectation because it's reval? What would be the expectation? Are we looking for assessments of the whole town to happen at once? Is it just going to be partial pieces of property? And do we expect that the price of housing is, going to decrease or increase? Is there any read on that?
And I'd be happy to do it, but I would touch base with RRG on that, because they do this across the state and they have a very good wealth of knowledge of what kind of trends they're seeing across the state. So, and Kim, you as well. But I do believe it's a full reval. But I will make sure on that, and I'll get their thoughts, RRG's thoughts, and Kimmy's thoughts on the trends, what they're seeing on the housing market. I know that when I did do growth, number. I conferred with our RG twice to say, is this a good number? And they do expect it to start going down. So
Okay.
they felt also that though it lags, the market and valuation lags a year. So even if it goes down, it lags a year before it hits. So they do see the market starting a downward trend probably at some point within the year. But whether that affects us in 22 or 23, I'm not sure at this point. I will get more information from them.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Thank you.
And just to remind folks, I don't know when this switched over, but my understanding is since we've been using RRG, there's regular appraisals that happen yearly. They're software based on like properties that are sold.
Yes.
So my understanding anyway is that the 5-year reval is not as dramatic.
Right.
Doesn't produce as dramatic of.
Correct.
Councilor DeSorger, your question or comment?
Well, the first one was a comment. I believe there are two positions. There are two elected positions for that, just so everybody is clear on
Okay.
that. There's two for that salary and wages. My second question was, who's actually the oversight to make sure that that is done?
That would be our chief assessor with our RG in coordination with our RG. Emil.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other discussion on assessing? Seeing none, go to finance and accounting on the next page. Any discussion on finance? Any discussion on finance? Seeing none. Oh, comment from Councilor DeSorger.
Okay. Hi. Under so under the first part, permanent salary, wages, and full-time, how many employees is that?
More.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion on accounting? Any further discussion on accounting? Seeing none, we'll move to the city audit on the next page. Performed by Powers and Sullivan. This is their first year, I understand, in process. Any questions or discussion on city audit? Seeing none. We will turn the page to treasurer. Treasurer did lose a staff position this year. Councilor DeSorger, do you have a question on either treasurer, audit, or really anything?
Turning on the microphone. Yes, on both.
Okay.
First on the audit, because when do we expect the results of the audit? That was on the audit.
Director Tillman?
Yeah. So COVID-19's put a little clinker in this, but we have been working remotely. So I do believe they're putting together some drafts as we speak. So, upon review, and they still need to come out possibly, because they haven't been able to come out, to review some things, test some things. I'm hoping in June to be on the safe side to get the finals. And yeah, I'm still working on this now too.
Thanks. Councilor Forgy, did you have a question? Okay, I saw that Councilor Forgy had a question, but I'm not hearing anything. So I'll go to Councilor DeSorger, and I can always come back. Councilor DeSorger.
So they had a reduction, and for their is if I don't know if any adjustments need to be made there. If there were, is there any expected closing of any hours, or are there other departments that can fill in and help them if they need any help? I don't know how. I am not sure because we have so many different unions exactly how that works. But if they were needing additional coverage, are there people within the town hall that are able to help them? And because I I have not mastered at this time which union everyone is in.
And if you do master that, you'll have beaten me to it.
Okay.
I have spoken with the mayor about this, and I know that that adjustments are being made, and that the mayor would not have cut a position if she didn't believe that there were efficiencies to be found. And I know that the department is I believe working to make all those to meet the needs. But if you have further questions, we can. Councilor Forgy.
Thank you. I think this is probably for Liz Gilman. Wanted to know, under statute, under 32B, is it the treasurer's responsibility to administer health insurance and be the fiduciary officer responsible for that?
You know how sometimes you read something and the actual legal interpretation is different?
I get
yes,
it.
The statute states that. However, it doesn't mean you cannot have a human resource department that does benefits.
When you mentioned that, oh, sorry. I'm confused. Are you talking about the clerical responsibility is in the HR department, or is the treasurer no longer the officer responsible for administering insurance under 32B?
She does not administer it. Human resource does. She under 32B, she will pay the bills. So it's a difficult and it's not unusual. I would personally love to get the actual legal opinion on that, because I know that they're in larger cities. The treasurer, they have human resource department that does. So I think that there's.
Oh, sorry. Well, one of the concerns I have is with this particular piece is if we're funding if we're funding for these services, but that's being given to another department, I'm not understanding that first thing. The second thing is, if it says in the law that we should do it, to me, you go by what 32B says. Now,
But there's a
I'm out of line here. I guess I'm a
There's a
little out of line because it's a budgetary hearing and not a legal hearing, but I'm just questioning if you move all the functions and everything else away from that particular department and give it to another one, then that ultimate responsibility, which is being moved, does that happen with the salary as well? Does that person who's no longer responsible for that have a salary that's compatible with the duties that they currently perform? And is the person in HR who's responsible for the 32B at this point, are they being compensated adequately or properly for that new responsibilities?
Thank you, Councilor.
It's been that way for a long time. So this isn't occurring as a movement within the current budget. I'm not sure when it happened because I was not here. I don't know if anyone else has a background on that. But since I've been here, it has been in human resources. And human resources does both active and retired benefits. The treasurer is paying the bill, literally just paying the bill. That's not in her budget. It's in the health insurance budget. So I think that aspect of 32B is strictly followed, but I think you do need a legal interpretation of that particular statute, because often what you read is not the actual legal interpretation of the law. So I wouldn't mind getting that myself.
Well, I was going to say that I have the history, but what I'll do is I will email you and I'll CC the mayor, and that can be a discussion outside of this particular budget piece.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Any further discussion on the treasurer budget before we move on? Seeing none, we'll turn to page 2. What we're just talking about, legal. Anything? We want to talk about lawyers? Always a popular topic. From my standpoint, this is one of those moving targets. I appreciated that certain amounts of legal expenses were moved into the inspector, the health and building inspector sections, because that indicates to me an attempt to kind of look back at trends and the more detailed the line items are, the better sense we have of where things are going and how to predict. But since I've been on the council, it's hard to get a bead on what to budget here because it seems to jump around. So I don't have any strong feelings about changing any of these items, but is there anything anybody'd like to discuss? Or does anyone have questions? All right, seeing none, we'll turn the page to tax title and human resources. Take questions and discussion on either of these. Councilor DeSorger, you have a question?
Hi. So, if this was one of the ones, were 4 positions in this, and I'm just expressing my thoughts for if we were prioritizing things that perhaps that might be a place to combine, so that the human resources could be looking at the human resources for all employees throughout the town, no matter what department they were in. That was my little priority thought.
Thanks, Counselor. And just to clarify, you're suggesting, you're encouraging discussion around merging HR with the city and the school HR departments?
I am, because it was my understanding that there is a shared, I read through some notes on that, and there was some discussion about that in the past, an MOU that was not, they didn't reach a final agreement on, and it was started and not finished, and where we have to look at conserving where we can. Certainly someone should be, that's something that has to be clearly looked at when people are coming and going and there and all the things that have to go with it. It might be a way for us to be fiscally responsible.
Thank you, Counselor. Yes, I sat in on the city school meeting this week, which happens monthly, and it was a topic of conversation. So I think it will continue to be one going forward. Any other discussion on tax title or HR? Seeing none, we'll move on to technology, which likewise was an initial topic of conversation at the city school meeting. It's a big, it would be a big endeavor, I think, for the city side IT to absorb or merge somehow with school IT, but I support the conversation, especially around whether the schools having GSAT might sort of create some cost savings and better service. But again, I believe those conversations are happening. Any further discussion on this budget? Okay. Moving on, next page we have, let me see, elections. No, I missed one, sorry. City clerk and elections. These are smaller departments, so I'm gonna just keep reading them, and if anyone has questions or comments, just interrupt me, please. Registrars, licensing commission, planning department, conservation commission, planning board and zoning board of appeals. Question, Councillor DeSorger.
Again, I just noticed it did, I don't know how this works, but again, my first year, it didn't appear. Some people are in different unions, but it didn't appear that there was any cost of living. I don't know if that's the general practice. I think that was in the clerk, for the clerk or planning. That was as far as I got with my thoughts. I don't know how that works, and maybe that's not appropriate to ask.
No, that's a good question.
I just noticed it was the same.
The positions that you mentioned, I believe, are both NR, and so they're not part of the unions. They're non-represented because they're department heads. And so they might not necessarily have, contractual step increases like union represented wage earner might have.
So Councillor Wheeler, they put in their own budget. They every department head then puts in their own budget, and then they left theirs without any cost of living. Is that correct then? That is how they submitted their budget, correct?
I'm going to let Director Gilman take this one.
Departments were instructed to only put in contractual increases.
Okay.
So if there was a union step, an increase that is reflected in the budget. If there's an NR contract that extends into 21, that's in the budget. But not all the NR contracts are in sync. You know, people come on and at different times, you know? So they aren't all on the same renewal process, calendar, schedule. So
And
that's-
also,
Oh, sorry.
yes, Mayor.
oh, I just was going to add that we do have some department heads who are in a union.
That's true.
So unfortunately, it's not the same across the board. It's not many, but it's enough.
Thank you for that. Follow up, Councillor DeSorger?
Yes, I just wanted to make sure that we were doing. Well, I just looked at that and I said, and I don't know whose job that is to do. Are we doing the right thing by that? If, you know, Social Security goes up like 1.5%. I don't know how that works. So are we supposed to look at that, or does the mayor look at that? Or who does that?
Well, just
Liz
to remind ourselves before that
Okay.
the council does not have the ability to raise line items here. Certainly, we could bring it to the attention of the executive, and I'm sure that they would hear that.
Oh,
but if
sorry.
Mayor, no, not at all. I'm just reminding us of what our capacity here is. But if the mayor or Director Gilman want to add to that, would
I
be
just
fine.
I was going to say that, and Liz can correct me if I'm wrong on that, because I wasn't there when the department heads in December were given, or maybe it was even November, were given their marching orders by Mayor Martin, but I do think he gave them a amount or a percentage increase for their salary, for anybody's salaries that weren't contractual, you know, an amount for the cost of living or whatever that they could meet. So yeah, I could be wrong about that, but I seem to recall discussing that with a couple of them.
He actually said only put in contractual increases. So if someone
Yeah, okay.
didn't have an increase by contract, it was not put in.
Okay.
Thank you, Counselor, for a good question. And just to add to it, I know there are some larger raises that have been given to department heads, and they have to do with the pay equity study that is in process. Any further discussion on this matter or any of the departments that we're going through? Okay. Seeing none, we will continue. We were at zoning board, and then we'll move on to central services, which is, let's see, procurement falls under central services. If there's no questions or comment there, we'll move on to central maintenance, which is now under DPW. Hopefully, not hopefully. Do we have I got a hand from Counselor DeSorger. Did you have a question here?
I'm going to hold that till I finish looking at something. So I can come back if I
Yeah.
ask too later. Is that correct, Counselor Wheeler?
Yes, we can come back to any of these. And I am gonna just kind of keep going quickly here because, well, we're almost actually to capital items, and those will have a robust discussion. So the last one is energy, or not the last one, but the last one within this section. And then police. And then fire. I'm just taking a moment to look at my notes. And then dispatch, parking, parking enforcement, building inspections, emergency management, animal control, and then Greenfield Public Schools. So unless there's discussion on any of the smaller departments or public safety, anything that I just went through, we'll move on to discussing Greenfield Public Schools. I'll remind everyone that council's purview here is the bottom line number, but that doesn't mean that we can't make comments and ask questions about the budget they're in. So I know Councilor DeSorger had submitted many questions, not all of which were answered. But is there anything that we want to discuss about schools right now? Councilor DeSorger.
So that is for the schools to decide how they spend whatever they spend. I did just want to just say out loud that I had requested for a list of the vacancies, the number of vacant positions that there were, which I think were numerous, but I don't know that. But that was kind of my understanding. So that we are not knowledgeable of that. And so they have to figure out what they're going to do.
Thanks.
We didn't get all of that information. That's all I want to say.
Yes, they have a lot to juggle at this time. I will remind counselors that there is an access to information clause within the code, which we do have the right to take advantage of in certain circumstances. I don't actually think that there's a mechanism for us to now because of the time constraints that we're under. But you should, if you're not familiar with it, it's worth knowing about. Councilor Forgy.
Thank you. Hang on. There we go. I need some guidance, please. Right now, we are being asked to look at the mayor's number. Just bottom line number, that's it.
Yes, and I mean, my way of thinking on this is that you have to take a broad view of is that a number that is proper in light of the rest of the city's budget and in light of what you know of the school department's budget and its needs. The school will respond to the final number that the council approves. The council does, in this one case, have statutory ability to raise the number. It requires a 2/3 majority. It's somewhat irregular, but it did happen 2 years ago here in Greenfield. So, Councilor Forgy.
Thank you. Can somebody tell us, last time we heard from the chairperson, Peretti, that they're going back to the drawing board, and does anybody have an update on anything that's going on at this point? Or are they just going to wait for us to vote a bottom line number? And then make their adjustments? I'm just not clear about what's going on right now.
So I know we have Superintendent Harper on the line. Superintendent, if you're here and you're listening and you'd like to speak to this, you may. I'm sure the mayor could also speak in some way, and I know that Councilor DeSorger had her hand up.
Thank you, Councilor Wheeler. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Yes, Superintendent. Thank you for joining us.
Sure, no problem. I've been listening straight through. I enjoyed the questions and I appreciate the deliberation. So the Budget and Finance Subcommittee has been working through the reductions necessary to balance to the mayor's budget. The school department at this time is anticipating balancing at least to the mayor's budget. And as we said in the previous Ways and Means meeting, I think the key here right now is that the governor's budget is essentially been thrown out and that the state revenue projections are significantly down. And as you heard from Director Gilman earlier, there's a range of scenarios and we're preparing for that range of scenarios. It's hard to present specific cuts to the council because it could look from modest to very significant cuts. We are preparing for all of those, and I think there are a number of keys that would affect this. One is that we know there's federal stimulus money to schools. We've been told that that's along the Title I ratio. It's the majority of students in Greenfield are qualifying in this category. So that's a significant portion of our population, but we don't know what those dollars are yet. They're fairly flexible, but they're not meant to supplant your operating budget. They're meant to go towards the COVID eligible expenses, the purchases that we've needed to make. And we know that there'll be a significant increase in the level of need based on special education, mental health, and compensatory services and social emotional needs when students come back. So that's what we know. What isn't known is quite a lot. We worked very hard to advocate for the state revenue of the Student Opportunity Act funding. Tomorrow, the superintendents, of which I'm on the steering committee, are meeting with state legislators, and we're advocating at the state level, but also at the federal level for this kind of funding. And we recognize that municipalities also don't have the kind of flexibility to address these expenses, as you heard from the mayor and the director earlier. So we're committed to balancing to the budget as the council sets it. I don't see this as being the year that you have the flexibility to exceed this, although we know that schools serve a stabilizing impact on the community economically, and that investing in our students is always a good investment, both now and long term. But our attention at this point is on advocating for that relief at the state and federal level, so that we can continue to keep up what I think has been an absolutely astounding job by our educators here in the midst of Teacher Appreciation Week, of just totally turning education on its head and trying to serve students in this completely different paradigm. So, long story short, we're going to balance to the number set by the council, and we're working with the union and the committee to accomplish that. And at the same time, what we really need to do here is think long term about stabilizing the education funds so that this class of students is not unfairly missing out on what they would have been getting if they had been able to be in school during this period of time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent, and really appreciate you being on the line and being able to speak to that. I do support the mayor's number, the almost 19.7 million. That's at this point the number that I would be voting in support of. But I'll hear more discussion or questions or comments from any counselors if you have them. Okay, Counselor DeSorger.
My comment is I agree with you. That's it.
Thank you, Counselor. I appreciate it. It's good to, now is the time for us to get a sense of where we're at, of where the five of us as a committee are at. It's helpful, to even just start that so I appreciate that. All right. Unless there's further comment on public schools operating budget at this point, we'll move on to DPW.
Oh, sorry, Otis, I did have one question.
Yeah, Councilor Bottomley.
I was wondering if Superintendent Harper, if she's still on the line, could maybe address I know the teachers have been working without a contract for a year. And in the larger budget that was presented, if I read it correctly, there was nothing set aside for those potential negotiations. So I don't know what the status of that is, but I do think it's important we support those teachers too. And I'm just curious the status of that.
Councilor Bottomley, thank you for the question. I'm happy to take that. And I think Steve Neberko, our business manager, may also be with us on the line. So just to address the why is it not budgeted, historically it has not been budgeted in a contract negotiation year in the school department's operating budget, because the school department has accessed the city's contract stabilization account as part of all contracts settled across the city. So we didn't set aside specific funds. The past practice of the past practice has been to identify a specific dollar amount, let's say, X number of dollars for teachers. It makes it a little bit challenging to negotiate when that line is right there out in the open, but also it doesn't give the city the ability to sort of take advantage of, here's the available funds and here are the contracts that need to be settled. So that's the practice that we used. But you're absolutely right that the contract was up at the end of last year. Negotiations continued this year. And then, of course, we hit the exhaustion of the contract stabilization fund and the Unit C contract, and then heading into this COVID situation. So those negotiations do need to resume. The teachers are in need of an updated contract, and that will be needed to be accounted for. So thank you very much for the question.
Thank you so much. That clarifies.
You're most welcome.
Thank you both. That clarifies what is always a difficult situation to deal with. Councilor DeSorger, do you have a question?
Hi. So the IA's contract was just negotiated. and now this year the teacher's contract will be negotiated, so that they will have a contract. And do all of the principals, do they all have their contracts too?
Counselor DeSorger, the principals are on individual contracts. So there is a smaller line item that's for any individuals who are non-union, who have an individual contract for any reason. So this would include principals or associate principals, as well as anybody whose contract doesn't indicate a specific salary increase amount. So there's a very small line in the school department budget, and that small amount is doled out amongst anybody with an individual contract for an increase. So for example, if everybody got a 2% increase, then that would come from that one sort of shared line. It's a very small line because it doesn't include the teachers, the instructional assistants, the custodians, the admin assistant. It's for non-union personnel. And that is always, it sort of comes last. So historically, principals have been the last to get a raise because they wait until contracts are settled generally and until the budget is passed. And then that available line is used for modest cost of living adjustments. I will say that we are having trouble keeping pace with principals in area districts because our folks do a great job. They work hard, but they're not getting significant increases necessarily. So that small adjustment comes out of that one line.
Follow up?
Yes.
But are all of your principals acting under a contract at this time?
I believe so. I don't have all the files in front of me, but they're all, they should all be current as of now. And then as of July 1, at the start of the new fiscal year, they would be eligible for any cost of living adjustment or increases there.
Okay, thank you for that. Anything further on schools before we move on to DPW? Seeing none, we'll move on to DPW. We just talked with Director Warner a few days ago, but if anything occurred to you or if you had any comments, we could take those now. Let's see. Counselor Elmer.
Is this where I get to ask about the dredging of Leiden Glen?
Yeah, that's a specific capital item.
You just can't wait. No, it's a specific capital item.
Okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
we'll get there. Actually, hopefully we'll be there soon. So we'll move on to health, the health department, where I'm at page 127 at this point. I know our health director spoke about if an item had to be cut in this budget, she would recommend the Mosquito Control District appropriation, which is a purchase of service. But I think, as I said then, I don't really think this is the year to cut emergency preparedness funds. So I'm not inclined to do that, but if anyone else is interested. And if not, we will move on to the Council on Aging's budget. Any questions on Council on Aging or Veterans? Youth Commission? Human Rights Commission? Disability Access Commission? Mayor's Task Force on Domestic Violence? Councilor Forgy. Counselor Forgy, did you have a question?
Yes, but I keep forgetting to turn everything on. There we go. I might have missed this. I wanted to know the number of full-time employees, part-time employees, and I wanted to also verify that that this Veterans Office does a lot of outreach into Western Massachusetts. Can somebody address that?
Let's see. I don't have those answers off the top of my head. I'm looking back through some of our budgeted information. If anyone does, please jump in.
Councilor Wheeler and Chairman
Counselor
Wheeler.
Ford? Yes.
Under their the fiscal year 21 goals and objective, it says add full-time deputy director to become fully accredited national service officer. Is that reflected in this budget as well? And does that mean that they're actually adding a person into that office? I mean,
Good question.
maybe that's for the Monday memo.
Yeah, unless
Monday memo.
unless Director Gilman, can you speak to that?
I believe that position has already been filled. So it's reflected in the budget. There is an individual in that deputy director position.
Okay. Thank you, Director Gilman. Did that answer your question, Councilor Forgy, or did we want to ask any more information?
I'd like to know, well, maybe for a Monday memo, I would just like to know if we are providing veteran services. I knew at one time we did it for Leiden. I don't know if that's still going on, if we've expanded that for Franklin County, and if there are offset pieces to that. Just some clarification would be great.
Thank you. So either Director Gilman or Clerk Scott, does one of you want to sort of grab that so that
I will ask him. Right. I do know that we still service the region and we see revenue from that, and you'll see that in a line in local receipts where we assess each of these areas for those services. But okay, the exact towns I'd have to ask Tim for.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Liz. Appreciate it. Good questions.
Yep.
All right. Unless there's anything further, we're going to move on to library. Hopefully the library will be able to reopen, at least to some extent, soon. Unless there's questions or comments, we'll move on to recreation. And historical commission. And debt service, debt interest, short-term debt interest.
Exciting
stuff, people. I don't know why you don't want to have anything to post assessments. All right, contributory retirement. This might be the one that I think about the most, but I'm not sure. It's you know, just to reiterate, this is an assessment that's, you know, basically comes from PARAC and then the retirement board. There's not much we can do about it, but it's certainly something that's worth talking about because it does amount to one of the biggest increases year over year, every year. And workers' comp is another big one. Unemployment and employee health insurance, obviously a really huge huge expense that continues to climb, and there's not a lot we can do about it. Now, a question from, or comment from Councillor DeSorger.
So one of the things that I heard while we were listening to Director Gilman, one of the best things that we can do for the benefits is to be hiring, if it's full-time employees, that is, am I correct that that is more beneficial to the town if full-time employees are hired? Is that correct? That was for Director.
It was a suggestion that I had made that we analyze our part-time positions. Some you won't be able to combine, just either physical distance or the nature of the position. However, I did suggest we look at it so that you have one person for two part-time positions and therefore one health insurance cost.
Mm-hmm.
Versus two, because someone is eligible for health insurance at 20 hours a week.
I guess I'm just saying that out loud for all departments where you
Okay.
had said it. And
Yep.
that struck me as where that's one of our largest things that's going up, and everybody deserves all of those things. If you work all those years, you need all of those benefits. And it's just something to think of in the hiring process. That was a comment.
Thank you,
Over
Councillor.
now.
All right. It's occurring to me that we may, well, we just have a lot to get through, really, is all it is. So I'm going to reel off the last few before we get to our enterprise funds. Life insurance, Medicare, liability. Feel free to just interrupt me. And then we move on to enterprise funds. Page 154, sewer. Would anyone like to discuss sewer or water enterprise funds? Okay. If not, that's okay with me. We did obviously have our discussions with Director Warner already. GSET Enterprise Fund. And unless there's any further discussion on those items, well, maybe before we move to capital, we should just come back to where we started about the broad question of the general fund budget. And if anyone has any further discussion on it in general, happy to take those questions or comments now. And if not, that is quite all right with me because we have a fair amount of capital to get through. We don't have to get through it tonight, but I think if we have some cursory discussion about each item, that will put us in a better position for Monday. So I will turn the page to capital improvements. This is always presented in many different forms So I'll go down the list on page 164, and we're going to go in order, starting with fire. They obviously have the majority of the capital requests this year, which is not unusual. What is unusual is that the requests actually made it through the capital improvements committee, through the mayor, and to us. And who knows, we may even approve them all. So why don't we actually start with, well, Councilor DeSorger, question, do you have a comment about fire in general, more specific?
Yeah, no, just specifically the first three. I've been watching this for year after year after year. I don't know why I find this so fascinating, but I do. And these have been put off and put off and put off, and I happen to serve on one committee with Chief Strahan, and I thought by not replacing one of the trucks, the repair itself on one truck was $45,000. I'd just like to comment that. So I think that we put off as long as we could put off those things, and that would be a disservice to the people, to the town, and to those who protect us.
Thank you, Councilor. I concur. Councilor Forgy?
Thank you.
Oh, don't.
Because we're a new Ways and Means Committee, I think it's really important that everybody understands that these are not all coming out of general operating funds, that there are offsets, and that language usually says things like, to ask the mayor to seek out bonds or grants or whatever. But if it's not general fund, is it possible just to say where it is coming from so that our committee is informed and the public is informed as well?
Yes, absolutely. I believe that, let's see if I can read. This is enumerated on page 167 to some degree, where it lists general fund, and if there's a further, I'm just trying to find the key that explains what.
Page 170.
170, thank you.
One.
Right, so, and that was a good good question. So going by the key, and obviously, Director Gilman, you can interrupt if I get anything wrong here, but going by the key on the rescue engine 3 replacement would come out of the general fund as well as capital stabilization. The brush truck would come out of the general fund and I believe excess bond money from Fema. And engine 5 would come out of the general fund and borrowing. That's, I mean, most of these are going to, most of the bigger items are all going to be borrowing, but there was some creative thinking happening around taking over a lease, and that's kind of how Chief Strand was able to make this proposal work. Does that answer your question, Councilor Forgy?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you. So the fire station obviously is the biggest and most important capital item before us this year. It's imperative that we fund this if in order to allow the new library, which has already been approved, to move forward. There's a lot of pieces to this, but they're all being discussed by the building committee. So questions or discussion on the fire trucks or the fire station?
For it. Good.
All right. All right. Seeing none, I think the fire, again, the fire capital this year is probably the most important, and I hope we pass it. Moving down to IT, I think we discussed this both with Director Warner and Director Fleury. But if there's any questions or discussion, let me know. If not, we'll go down to police, who are requesting a mobile command post and a mobile message board.
I just have a question.
Yeah, Councilor DeSorger.
Tell her you can't hear her.
We lost
Sorry.
you there. Okay.
Well, that's
Oh,
because
no, you were muted.
that's because I forgot that I hadn't turned the microphone on. I think I would be misspeaking on that. The mobile message board. I know I'm not gonna say anything on that right now. It's all right.
Okay, change your mind. All right. Yeah, my feeling, the mobile command post, I think, is useful in emergencies. And so I think it only makes sense to approve that this year. The mobile message board, I see the need for it. It's not a huge expense. It is something that I think people ask for. So that's where I'm at on those at this point. Any further discussion or questions on police? If not, well, yeah, Councilor DeSorger.
Okay, I do, because I think can we share these message boards?
Right. So just to clarify the question, I think there's the mobile message board that the police are requesting, and then there's
Is that the one where we're looking at the speed, or the one that we're
my understanding on a trailer. It could be it could be displaying the speed. It could be giving messages, and then the signs that DPW are requesting. Those can. I think there's one in Sunderland, if I could be mistaken, but it'll show you the speed that you're going, and it'll turn red if you're going too fast. But I think I'm going to turn it over to Director Warner, who can correct anything that I misspoke on.
Thank you, Councilor. I think you pretty much covered it. I think a good description of what the chief is looking for here is what we're seeing out on Main Street, put out by the Sheriff's Department. It has multi-uses. You can put any message on it basically you want. You can also use it as a signboard. The two that I have mixed into my safety improvements capital request are very mobile. We can move it from post to post throughout the city if we receive complaints. And the chief and I talked about this early on, and we thought it would be both departments receive multiple complaints on speeding, so it's kind of like we're spearheading it together to move these things around throughout the city if they're approved.
Thank you, Director. I'm glad you're speaking to each other, and thanks for the question. Councilor DeSorger, did you have a follow-up?
No, that was a thumbs up.
Okay. Yeah, it's not something I feel strongly about, but I think that a relatively small expenditure for safety's sake is something that I at least will vote for. Any further discussion? If not, we'll move down the line to DPW, who, as we know, have a number of items, including Chapter 90, funds which come from the state and are, it's the practice of Greenfield to put them all towards roadway improvements. We had the design for Sanderson Street reconstruction. We have the traffic safety improvements that the director just mentioned. The sidewalk replacement program, which has been cut. Comment from Councilor DeSorger.
I have a comment on that, the sidewalk replacement program. This came up the other night, and I just want to reiterate this while everyone is listening. I'm on disability access. There are people from all walks of life, and we've all been walking more. This was something I just like capital improvements to continue to look at in the future. I've spoken to several people who have fallen on some of our sidewalks, and this is what we're encouraging. And I totally go along with the 40,000 that is there. And as we are continuing to do this, I hope that we will be putting a heavy emphasis on making our sidewalks safe. And this is and now a question to Director Warner. I know you listed the streets that you could get done, and you told me that you could get 14,000 square feet done, and I know you listed the streets, Abbott, Arch, Davis. Out of that 40,000, how many of the streets that you listed will you actually be able to complete with that 40,000?
You hear me?
Yes, definitely.
Yes, I'm thinking we may be able to get to a lot of that this year or in the next spring. As you know, under our current situation and other emergencies pop up, it's kind of a moving target. But I will say it's about 4,400 feet on average for that $40,000. But it all depends what we find when we remove the old blocks. We could shorten that linear footage quite a lot if we have to replace the subbase underneath the existing blocks and so on and so forth.
Say that again. It's 4,000 what?
400 linear feet. And that's averaging 4.5 feet. Our walks average from 3.5 to 5 in general, but as you know, downtown the walks are much wider.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for doing that.
You're welcome.
Thanks for the question, Counselor. I agree with you that it's really an area of huge importance where modest investment can go a long way. So getting back to the other items, we have replace aging guardrail. We have a road treatment truck, a mini excavator, and the Fisk Avenue parking lot retaining wall. Any discussion or questions on any of these items? For process, and I guess I am frustrated that between November and now, the city was not able to. I had asked during the Capital Improvements Committee meetings, I had asked for recommendations from the Parking and Traffic Commission on 2 of these items, and they were not made. And I understand there was a administrative transition, but I think that we have a really good committee on parking and traffic whose power is not necessarily vested in them. So in order for that committee to be taken advantage of, the executive office needs to really, I guess, rely on them. And I would suggest that they do that, because as a counselor, I am more apt to support items like these if they have the backing of that body. That said, I see the value in the traffic safety improvements and the retaining wall. But I did have to bring that up. Any further discussion or questions on any of the DPW items before us? Councilor DeSorger.
I'm hoping that we can do all of those things, and I just, Director Gilman said, and I think what she said at the beginning applied to all of this. Is that correct, Councilor Wheeler, about prioritizing or not?
Sorry, would you remind me what?
So Director Gilman said at the beginning that she actually did welcome our thoughts on prioritizing. Is that, does that go to this also or not? Yes?
Well, actually, that brings up a good point, which is that capital items are should be dealt with by council in May. Many of you may remember that many capital items were tabled
I do.
and then tabled again. Well, I don't believe there's statutory regulations that prevent us from doing that. As chair of this committee, I really can't recommend strongly enough that we avoid that. So, and the reason is bonding. It makes it really difficult when you bond. If you say there's an item that we table in May, and then we do, after all, approve it in September. Well, what if you had to bond in between?
Okay.
Or what if you bond later? How do you justify it? Is it part of what fiscal year is it part of? So I think it really creates a lot of problems if we table things. So yeah, like Director Gilman said, capital, because most of it comes from borrowing, should not be affected directly by fluctuations in state aid or even the economy. So I would encourage us to act on all of these items next week. And if your level of comfort is not there for you to vote positively, then that's your prerogative. But I would encourage us to vote yes or no on all these items.
Okay.
But thanks for the question, because I had meant to bring that up. So anything else on DPW? If not, we'll move down the list to recreation. So their only request that moved through this year was playground and equipment for Four Corners. And I believe we heard from either the superintendent or I think we heard from someone on it. If there's any questions, or boy, can you tell I'm getting tired? You probably. All right, we'll move down the list to schools. If I can find my page. God, I hope I can.
Councilor Wheeler?
Yes. Councilor Elmer.
Elmer here. The skate park. Is that an optional?
Yeah.
If things
Right.
go really south.
Good question. So the skate park is in the 5 or 10 year operating long-term capital budget for the rec committee. It was not approved by the capital improvements committee, but that in no way means that capital improvements doesn't support it going forward. Mayor, did you want to weigh in on this one?
Okay, yes, I do. Thank you for that, Otis, and thank you for the question, Phil. Because the skate park is also near and dear to my heart, and making sure that we do eventually someday get one. I spent a long time talking to Christy about this when I went over the capital budget. And she assured me that if it didn't get funded this year, that would be okay. I mean, she's also very committed to having it funded. So just know that we did consider it, and I was fully willing to put it in there. It meant that she might lose some other aspect of her capital budget, but she was fine with taking it out as long as we keep it in we're not eliminating it from capital in future years.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, and just to explain my vote, I voted no on it because I thought that the fire station took precedence, and in terms of the amount of capital items that we already had this before us this year, but I certainly support it going forward. Any other discussion on the playground or anything else from the rec department? If not, we'll move on to the schools. On page 165, going down these in order. So the fencing, I hate to say it, on the fence about this one.
Good one, Counselor.
But and it's merely because, you know, if we had to cut somewhere, this might be a place where I would start. But that said, some of the fencing is in really poor shape, and does create a safety hazard. And it's a relatively modest expenditure that is probably necessary in the long-term sort of fiscal planning of the city to avoid deferred maintenance. So anyway, any discussion on the fencing? Does anyone feel strongly either way? Councilor DeSorger?
I went and looked at a lot of the fencing, and to me, that was safety. I saw rusty fencing. I saw falling over fencing, hole in fencing. The worst fencing, the two worst fencings I saw were at the Newton School and around the well, that was terrible. Well, that was not very good. And then at the North Parish School, it was rusty. I wouldn't want my child to fall against that fence. And so I understand that we have fiscal constraints, but that I had some other ones on this, but that wasn't one I was on the fence about.
Thank you, Councilor DeSorger. Yeah, the Newton School one had me concerned too about what anyone who was supervising children, I would actually feel kind of uncomfortable putting them in the position.
And could I ask something else? That shed there, the shed that's there, we all work together on that. There's a shed down there that kind of blocks the view. Is that something that like the DPW can work with to get like rid of that shed that they don't need? Seems like they could get in a truck. That was just outside of the budget question, but I know Marlo's on the line.
Sure, if Director Warner or the superintendent has any knowledge about the shed, other than that it exists and you want to speak to it, go ahead. If not, that's quite all right.
Okay.
So painting is the next item.
question.
Yes.
So the painting was not that even wasn't delineated well to me with what we were spending that on. I heard that we were painting around these windows. I've gone and looked at everything, and I thought 20,500 for the painting around the windows. I saw the 3 windows that would needed to be done at the North Parish School. Certainly, the paint was falling off and the wood was exposed, but I couldn't imagine that would be that. I think there was another inside painting, not in. I don't mean like a painting inside of a building. I don't know, but I didn't. Unless I missed something, I didn't see that well delineated so that I could be. I just would have to. I can't say on that one.
Right. You need to know.
Enough info.
Yes. Good question. So my understanding here is we're just talking about painting at the North Parish School.
Yes, the North Parish School.
Please correct me if I'm wrong, but
You're correct, Counselor.
yes.
And that would be around the windows?
And I know the mayor feels strongly, and I feel strongly that sort of a regular exterior painting like that, it not only provides aesthetic value, but it also is beneficial to the long lasting. Just it helps the wood, and it's good for the building in general. But Superintendent, do you have any more detail on the painting at North Parish?
Sure. It is around the windows. It is scraping and painting of exterior wood area. In many areas, it's exposed, so it's down to the wood. So it's becoming a structural issue in that the wood is exposed and so on. But it's not just around the windows. It is a number of the trim closer to the roof line and some of the sill plates and so forth. So it's just long deferred. I think it's been a couple of years that it gets through the mayor's budget, and then it's it's important, and then it's one of the things that has been deferred for several years. I hate to say anything can continue to be deferred. We could, quote, scrape by to continue your bad puns on the school capital. But we could scrape by another year with this, but the problem becomes that we have to take care of it at some point. It is a structural issue, but it is scraping exterior paint to preserve the wood itself, so we don't have rot and other structural damage.
Thank you, Superintendent. Councilor DeSorger, follow up or comment?
Just to follow up, I looked only at the windows because that was all I heard about, which I definitely saw that wood was exposed and it was flaking. And I also looked at those windows and I thought that didn't appear to me that would amount to that, although I'm not a contractor or anything, but it didn't look like that would amount to 20,000. So I had a question about that. Had I known to look up above that was what we were looking at, because how much I research things, then I would have been looking at that. So it would just be good to have that, because we're actually voting on this for the town. So we have to know exactly what it is. Onward.
Thank you, Counselor. Unless there's anything further on painting, we'll move on to the flooring request, which is at the middle school and the Federal Street School. Any questions or comments, concerns about flooring? This is another item that's been deferred. Next, we have parking lot paving at Newton and Newton and I can't actually, I don't have the right.
Federal Street, Counselor.
Federal Street. Thank you, Superintendent. Any questions or comments on paving? Yeah,
I looked. I could see that Newton School paving was a mess. And did that pass conservation that wasn't in the wetlands?
Oh,
Because that's near the wetlands. There's water right behind it. I don't know if that, we, from past experience on planning board, we had questions about paving, although I could see how much that needed that. And then, but I just had a question about that. And then I don't know if I'm supposed to ask these things because they've already been through the capital committee, but
well,
can we ask whatever we want, or should we just?
well,
say
that's it. So your question was about the Conservation Committee? Is that
Yeah.
your question? Yeah, if it affects the way that you vote or any potential, conflicts with bylaws or procedures, then
Do
yes.
we get estimates? Who do we get the estimate from? Or am I allowed to ask that?
I'm not sure what you mean by asking.
Well, do we get estimates on the paving? How does that work? And am I supposed to be asking that at this point?
The question is certainly allowed. Normally with these capital items, the department would be making its own estimate, and they would not be putting out a request for proposal before the item has been funded. This is sometimes some of these school items are a little bit tricky because they may or may not be handled somewhat in-house by DPW, or they may go out to bid. And I'm not sure here about whether DPW would have the capacity to do any of the paving work. I would imagine it would depend on their workload and whether all of their capital. Any further discussion or comments, questions about paving? All right.
Councilor Wheeler?
Yes.
Just a couple comments. The conservation, I am sure that we can redo that parking lot, or a contractor can redo that lot, but we would have to follow through conservation steps. I'm sure it would need silt fencing and whatnot, but it's an existing parking lot, so I think we'll be fine there. But we should go through the process. And also, it is a really large project. We don't have a large paver. If Jordana's still on here, she knows that I've been probably patching that parking lot down there even since before she came aboard. So it's definitely in rough shape, and we're constantly taking care of hazards on that one. So
I saw
I
that.
just wanted that comment.
Thank you. Really helpful, Director. Okay. Unless there's further questions or comments, we'll move down to windows and walkway at North Parish.
Me.
Councilor DeSorger.
So first I'm going to go to the walkway, which I have little grandchildren. I would want them to be safe walking from the cars to whatever. But I noticed that we spent $40,000 on sidewalks, which gave us 4,440 linear feet of sidewalk for $40,000. So that, I don't know how long this walkway is that we are building, but I would just had a question about that one. I don't know that I could vote in favor of that because it was half of the price of the sidewalks. That would be 4,440 linear feet at 4 feet wide.
Director Warner, could you speak to that?
I think this was a project that goes a few years back. I believe this sidewalk would attach the entranceway of the school up the street to the parking lot that we had put in, I believe, 6 years ago, because it's hazardous in the wintertime, so on and so forth, for children and parents to get to the front door by walking down the street. It is in a rare spot to where you have to build the walkway with curbing. There's excavation involved there, more than the normal excavation. It's a brand new walk. I believe that was a contracted price there too also.
How many,
Yes, follow up.
I'm sorry, I didn't raise my hand. Counselor Wheeler. How many feet of sidewalk was that? About,
I'm trying to remember. I can send that in a memo also, but I'm thinking it's 350 to 400 feet. I don't have it here at home.
oh, okay.
But it's an elevated slab. You're incorporating the curbing into the roadway. It's not your standard straight ahead walkway replacement.
And so I've been down there 3 times. And so I don't know where it's going. So that would be maybe.
It would be going right along.
If by Monday, I guess we ask for further things on Monday. So if I'd just like to see a little, okay.
There we go. We got pictures. Excellent.
Okay, so this
Hey, thank you, Jordana.
You're welcome, Marlo.
So this is that's like along the street, right?
Yeah, so you're going from the newer parking area past the playground and up towards the building. And what you're looking at right here, obviously you're behind a parked car, but usually this row is filled with cars that are parking. And then if it's the winter time, the white car that you're looking at, you're going to have to picture being in the street instead of here where it is. So the problem becomes when this is where the cars are parked, and you can see the dirt and kind of gravelly area where cars are parking there. When that's covered in snow, that parking becomes extended into
Right.
the street instead. And so then the walkway is actually several feet out into the middle of the road or through a snowbank. So it's not handicap accessible. And as Director Warner indicated earlier, as you can tell, you're building this up from scratch, so it needs the curbing and so forth. I will say that this is the one most requested capital item from members of the public and parents. And I've been contacted many, many times about this over the course of this past year in particular. Really concerned about student safety traversing from this newer lot, which is quite helpful to the school itself.
That was extremely helpful. I just couldn't picture where it was going from where to where. So thank you so much, Superintendent Harper.
You're quite welcome.
All right. Yes, that was great. Any other discussion on that? If not, we'll move down. I think we were on, maybe there was also windows, which we had not talked about. I think at some point we discussed that it made sense to do the windows at the same time as the painting at North Parish. Councilor DeFoger.
So I saw the 2 round windows that obviously I think we're talking about, and then the archway one over. I walked all around. The bay windows all the other windows looked like they were new. So are we talking about those 3 windows for $100,000? Because that's what I saw that looked old. And they were the ones with the bad wood around it. If I lived in a home and we're going to put in new windows, I'd be putting the wood and the painting around it because the paint was very bad. And I could see those look like older windows. However, the other ones appeared to me to be newer. So were we talking about those 2 round windows and the archway one?
Counselor, you're correct about the windows that you looked at. I don't have the exact count in front of me. I believe there are a few additional as well. The project would complete all the remaining windows that were left out when the windows were replaced. So you're correct that many of the others are newer and more energy efficient. Not to shoot myself in the foot here, but as I said earlier, this one project, if you needed to hold off on something, there is an energy savings when you make repairs like this and upgrades. But if you needed to find an area, because it's less related to safety than the other ones, this is one that I would recommend holding on if you're looking for an area to make a hold. And I think you're correct that the painting and the windows should be done at the same time.
Thank you very much, Superintendent.
Thank you. All right, so we will continue down the list to paving at the Newton School. And I believe that's just the parking lot, but I could be wrong on that. And then exterior doors, again at North Parish and also the Newton School. And I think those also had some energy savings in terms of covering drafts and whatnot. Any questions or comments? Councilor DeSorger.
How many, I saw all the ones at North Parish that were the older ones. I looked at, no, at Newton School, I looked at North Parish and I didn't see any doors, although I don't know that. They didn't look like they were older. How many at the North Parish School? Which doors were we talking about?
This completes all the exterior doors. There are several that don't actually close all the way, even at North Parish. So they don't latch fully. And there are some vulnerabilities to the building. And some of the doors, as we discussed, have small critters and not so small critters that can make their way through those doors. Which obviously for health, safety reasons, and of course energy loss, you just can't have. I think I don't have the number in front of me, Counselor. I apologize. I did send a request that I got from you this morning to our facilities director. I wasn't able to get a final response today before this meeting. I believe we're talking on the order of about 8 doors, including the double doors.
And I would never have, oh, may I speak again, Counselor Wheeler?
You may.
Okay. And I would never have expected you to have gotten that information from this morning because I probably wrote it very, very late. And I saw the ones. I was good with North Parish. I just wanted the exact number at Newton School. So if it's possible by Monday to have those ones, perhaps before our meeting, just take a peek at them. That's all. If you're able to do that, Superintendent Harper.
Sure, no problem.
All right, thank you. Any further questions or comments on any of the schools' capital projects? Seeing none, we can always come back, but we're almost there. We're going to move down to GSET, build out materials and customer premise equipment. This is imperative for their further expansion. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, we'll now move down to the sewer I&I repairs and the evaluation study. I think we discussed it on Monday, but if there's any questions on that. If not, now's your chance, Councilor Elmer, dredging of Leiden Glen.
Thank you. We may have discussed it, but until I saw the size of the number, I hadn't really focused on it. I did look up a document from 2017 that had a map of the reservoir, and it had a 5-year schedule for dredging it. I guess my question is, where are we on that schedule? And if we had to make drastic cuts, is this something we could postpone for a year?
Okay, thank you. So the original plan, I believe it was 3 years back, the previous director put a 5-year dredging plan together. And the idea was to dredge so much per year out of the Leiden Glen. So when the bids came in, I believe before I'd returned, the bids came in at 1.8 or 1.9 million for the 5-year plan. What was involved in that plan was a lot of setup and takedown of a massive dredge in and out of there every year. So it basically doubled the initial cost of $1 million. It was $200,000 per year for 5 years. So it was one of these carryover projects that I didn't get into last year. As we all know, there was many things to get through in capital last year, but we hit the reset button on this one because I wanted to find out if we could dredge that glen traditionally like we have in the past. We drain it, we remove all the material and refill it in the summer or early fall. So I got the okay from DEP, or the verbal from DEP, that would be fine. So the takeaway is this provides the city of Greenfield with 33% of our drinking water supply. And the takeaway is I believe at 984,000 from the initial plan, we're saving about $1 million to do it in one shot. And it needs to be done every 10 to 15 years, depending on the turbidity, what we call turbidity levels of our drinking water up there. The higher those levels go, the more treatment, more pump time, more chlorine, so on and so forth. So it affects a lot of things downstream into the headworks to the city. I think I covered that for you. If you got anything else.
I just have a follow-up. So no dredging has been done yet. The repair was done on the dam. Am I right about that?
That's correct. There was an appropriation for $200,000 for engineering and dam repairs. Sorry, that sounded funny, but so we were into that 200 for about 100,000, and it's going to be a cost to redo the permit through DEP to dredge this in one scoop, excuse the pun. So that's where we're at.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Director. Thank you, Counselor. Yeah, so as Director Warner said, there's a cost savings there, and because it's borrowing, the expenses spread out over a few years anyway. Any further questions or comments on dredging of Leyden Glen, or the Green River pump station roof replacement, or the Millbrook well reconditioning? Councilor DeSorger.
I just have one question for Director Gilman. Is this is just about the borrowing for capital? I understood what Councilor Forgy said about the source. We identified the source. My question was, as this is my first year, we take this total amount as a whole and decide to borrow that and put it. Could you explain once more? Not the source, but how we
borrow.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Okay. So as the project goes along, we short-term borrow. They're called bands.
Yes.
Bond anticipation. When the project is completed, we bond. The years that we can pay the borrowing over is actually determined by law. There is a whole list of how many years you borrow something. So we work with bond counsel, on doing preliminary schedules, but also they verify, is it inside the debt limit, outside the debt limit? How many years can this be borrowed for? So that's part of the process. So something may be spread out over 20 years, something could be 30 years, but it depends on the law. You could pay things more aggressively, but there is a maximum on each item that you may borrow for, the number of years. I don't know if that's what you're asking.
Yes, it is. And then, but I also wanted to know, because I've been at all of these meetings where they were voted on or not voted on or tabled. And is it better is it easiest and the best borrowing rate if we make our decision and lump this amount together, not of ones that are coming from like I get the other sources, but ones that we have to borrow? Is it better if those are put together?
Absolutely, because
Okay.
it's a tremendous, we put it out to bid, even if
Okay.
it's the anticipation notes.
Okay.
So it is better to do it all together.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director, and thank you, Counselor, for your question. All right, so I think before we make any more puns, we may have probably time for us to finish up. To remind folks, we will be voting recommendations on on the general fund budget, the enterprise fund budgets, all of the capital projects that we just discussed, appropriating sewer and water retained earnings and establishing spending limits on revolving funds. I would recommend that those last couple items that we save discussion for Monday when we're a little fresher. I would recommend that if you do intend on proposing any amendments to cut any budget items within the general fund, that you come prepared to make those, because there may not be as much beating around the bush on Monday. I certainly don't think there'll be almost 3 hours of discussion. We should be able to just jump right into our votes, and I will not at that point go line by line through the general fund operating budget. So again, if you do intend on making any motions, you might want to prepare them ahead of time, or at least have them highlighted within your budget book. That said, any further discussion, questions, or comments this evening? All right. Been a long night. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate all the department heads and the superintendent and the mayor who've been on this call.
Thank you.
Normally, I like to keep things to 2 hours, but we had.
It's been
Yes, Mayor?
Oh, I was just going to say it's been a pun-filled evening, and I've enjoyed every minute of it.
Glad you still have your sense of humor, Mayor.
I think that makes me think that we need to get out more.
We do.
All right. Our next meeting is Monday, May 11th. It's the last Ways and Means budget meeting on FY21. It's at 4 p.m. via WebEx. I'll hear a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Move to Sorger.
Second, 4G.
Thank you, counselors. This meeting is now adjourned at 8:44. Good night, everyone.